Welcome to Beermerica, where a beer can beer, and you and your bros can beer some brewskis. Sorry, I did not rent a bar for this video, but cheers to Storyblocks who sponsored it. And let's start with the big picture. The story of beer in America is huge, like so huge that plotting the breweries in America would break my animation program. So let's just look at one state's amazing evolution. In 1980, there was one locally owned brewery in Oregon, Cartwright Brewing, which, according to a review after the first batch, the distributor just said, "Improve the beer." Now look at Oregon's craft breweries today. How did this happen? Geography, it doesn't just explain American beer, it explains how that beer went from good to pretty bad, to kind of amazing.
So, get thirsty. All beers look good. These are real people who happen to like beer.
I spoke to an economist about American beer history. I really love the title of your paper, actually.
Taste for Temperance, How American Beer Got So Bland.
And I learned the national and international scope of this story to map the United States of beer. I've got 3 types of beer in my awkwardly beer-filled refrigerator, and none of them are even an IPA, the best type of beer. But the first beer I'm gonna show you, it's a pretty close second. It's a stout. American beer started out darker, and probably better than it became. Philadelphia and Boston were the colonial beer capitals, along with New York City. Philadelphia and Boston had British-influenced tastes, while New York had more Dutch influence. That's why I picked a darker beer, like a porter or a stout, for this scene. Those were just more common. Few of the beers were lagers, the type of light, drinkable beer that later became dominant. Ales and porters ruled. And notice it's not in a bottle, but a glass. Beer wasn't really shipped, so volumes were small and often confined to taverns. Homebrewing, every man his own brewer, was even more practical at this time. Honestly though, I could have picked a glass of whiskey or some hard cider for this section because America wasn't really a nation of beer drinkers yet. It went bad really quickly, there was no refrigeration, so it was kind of hard to keep beer.
I can't imagine you or I would have been drinking a lot of ales in the 1840s. Yeah. So often it just would have gone bad before it gets to you.
This chart shows gallons per person drunk up to 1865. There's a lot of hard liquor here, a fair amount of cider until a crash, and then beer was all the way down here. But over the next 50 years, consumption of beer would go way, way up. Do you have a favorite chart or table in the paper? Is there one in particular that ended up being your fave?
Let's see. Yeah. Oh, you know what? I have it. Well, beer is percentage of alcoholic beverages consumed. That's the black line. That's really the key one. So researchers tend to look at, gallons of absolute alcohol consumed per capita. That's when we become a beer drinking nation.
I'll argue that 100 years through Prohibition and beyond are defined by this beer in a few ways. How did this transform American beer?
A long-lasting head that seals in all the smooth lager flavor like the lid on a stein used to do.
Okay, let me stop this for a second. I do want to tell you about today's sponsor, which is Storyblocks. Thank you, Storyblocks, for supporting this channel. If you don't know, they provide video assets, audio assets, and motion templates for video makers, and it is an invaluable resource. Most importantly, it's a subscription plan. So this incentivizes you to edit creatively when you're making your, rebuttal to my beer splainer. The last map explainer I did, I went all the way to Kansas City. I got a nice exterior shot, but the sequence would have been so much better if I'd had a drone shot. I could have if I had just made use of Storyblocks. I am really glad I was able to utilize it for this video. The intro, all that kind of funny stuff is from Storyblocks. And also they gave me a nice retro television that I could put those early ads on. So to go ahead and get started with unlimited stock media at one set price, go over to storyblocks.com/Phil Edwards or click the link that's in the description. Cheers, Storyblocks. Now let's go to Pennsylvania. By all accounts, the first lager showed up in Philadelphia by brewmaster John Wagner. He had come from Bavaria in Germany. The This beer is lighter and more drinkable than stouts and ales. It was also relatively stable. The oldest brewery, Yuengling, was started by a German immigrant from near Stuttgart who moved to Pottsville, Pennsylvania. Sometimes the lagers were darker bocks, like in this 1890 Yuengling ad, but they were lagers. This correlated with German immigration. This chart shows German immigration in the 1800s. You can see that it peaks in the 1880s, but it is high throughout. And Germans brought with them a taste for German beer. This map is from 1959, but the stereotypes are kind of informative for this earlier period. German immigrant means German beer. Milwaukee became a beer epicenter, and so did St. Louis. Ballantine, an alemaker out of Newark, was a rare exception to the lager rule. It was founded by a Scottish immigrant. But in the 1870s, the largest brewery was a largely local concern. That is where Budweiser comes in. I spent high school and college in Wisconsin, where Miller is from, so I have literally never ordered a Budweiser before. Now I have a 12-pack in this refrigerator. I feel like a traitor to my entire culture, but I think this is the right beer to tell this story. Adolphus Busch, the B in the Anheuser-Busch label, was born here, but he was inspired by a Czech beer brewed here. People speculate that this is what brought the Pilsner, an even paler lager, to America. And if you look on the Bud label, you'll see that they even added rice to make it more palatable.
Pilsners don't have to be blander than lagers, but sometimes they were. And some of the big brewers like Budweiser, Anheuser-Busch, and Pabst, they realized that adding corn and rice, it wasn't really a way to save money. It was a way to make it just more palatable and smoother. Blander.
It has a taste, it has a drinkability, it has a smoothness that only Beechwood aging can deliver.
Is it basically that they're just kind of mixing it in and just watering down the lagers?
Well, the Pilsners are lighter. A lot of people really don't want a dark lager.
The dark can be frightening.
I remember them in the 80s, like you get Beck's Dark, you could get Michelob Dark. Those were kind of niche.
There's nothing to fear with Michelob Dark. Oh, I know. Dark beer. It's bitter. It's for thick-necked guys named Gunter. No! Try Michelob Classic Dark, full-bodied taste that's Michelob Smooth.
I'm trying to put less newspapers on screen, but I'm actually going to read you this 1892 ad because it is hilarious to me. If you are suffering from sleeplessness or nervousness, try a bottle of the latest brand of our favorite brew, the American Pilsner White Label Exquisite Beer, recognized throughout the world for its superior stimulating properties. Americans insist that Anheuser-Busch make a doctor's services superfluous. You do not see a lot of beer companies claiming that their services make a doctor unnecessary. Anheuser-Busch led as breweries became national, thanks to rail, bottling, pasteurization, and refrigeration. Refrigerated cars like these made Anheuser-Busch really big. The growth of Pabst is also pretty instructive. They started in Milwaukee, but between 1879 and 1884, they started branches in Kansas City, Peoria, St. Paul, Ashland, and Pittsburgh. By 1893, they'd grown hugely, setting up branches in all these cities. Beer production consolidated. Number of breweries declined, even as barrels increased. So by the 1900s, beer had become a big, national industry associated largely with lagers and Germans. By World War I, the German Beer Association was so strong that anti-German sentiment and anti-beer sentiment brewed together. Brewed together? See what I did there? Let's move on. Is it the politics that the brewers are performing going into Prohibition that attracted you to this topic?
Yeah, that's why the paper's main title is A Taste for Temperance. Beer, for a long time, I think even today somewhat, was promoted as a temperance beverage. I think it's silly, like if you've ever been around drunk people drinking beer. But it's certainly possible to drink beer slowly and in moderation and not get drunk, but it's also possible to do that with whiskey or rum or wine or anything else.
Then Prohibition happened, but rather than kill the industry, it kind of concentrated and consolidated it further into that American Pilsner style made by just a few big brewers. Gangland breweries endured among legitimate concerns like soda-making breweries and malt syrup.
The lid is off in many places, with the downfall of Prohibition being celebrated in real old-time hilarity.
When it was over, breweries were constrained from selling their own beer by a 3-tier system in most states. Producers weren't allowed to sell their own stuff. That meant that small breweries, like those old taverns, were basically banned. You also couldn't put alcohol percentages on beer. People were worried about a potency war. In practice, this meant beer focused on drinkability.
If they're like most people today, they like a modern beer. A beer that's pale, light, smooth.
All this regulation promoted concentration among big breweries and a focus on marketing and drinkability of the American Pilsner. The foamy heads on these old beer ads are a visible sign of the uniform approach to beer.
It's rich, creamy head.
The head is light and creamy.
Boy, look at that creamy head.
Later pivots went to light beer because they didn't think consumers wanted better beer. So how did it get better? This is the last beer that I've chosen. It is a surrogate for the craft beer movement. It's from Aleson Brewery in Eugene, Oregon. It's got a local collab, it's not a lager, and it's being sold for its quality, not its drinkability. How did we get to this totally different place for beer? In 1978, the Federal Trade Commission released a report that today looks bleak. Breweries had dropped in number over the past 15 years, and money had largely gone to more and more ads.
When Mick and I played together, we were known to have a beer or two on special occasions.
Light beer from Miller. Everything you always wanted in a beer, and less.
But it was starting to change. In California in the 1960s, a new homebrew movement began, and that inspired breweries like Anchor Brewing and Sierra Nevada Brewing, started in 1979 by 2 home brewers. Around that time in 1978, a California senator and Wisconsin representative snuck home brewing legalization into a bill. This provided a groundswell of people who were suddenly interested in making and even just tasting better beer. And the real change, though, that came when states started passing laws saying that brew pubs could sell their own beer on site. Let's go back to Oregon in 1985. You can hear lawmakers debating the law and discussing the exact issues behind craft breweries.
And the whole purpose of this was that these microbreweries would essentially be able to sell some of their product on their premises. So the evolution was from the brewery to being able to sell, not...
I see.
Now you could grow a business from the home to the brew pub and then have a running start to start distributing it. And as this map shows, that is exactly what happened, with way more variety than the German lager, because that is what consumers actually wanted. So I lied to you. I've got a 4th beer that I'm gonna show you, because it's gonna keep telling this story. The last Mapsplained video I did about barbecue, it featured tons of agricultural geography. And while hops can taste different in different parts of the world, I think it's clear that this is mostly a cultural geography story. But these maps are really about the movements of people and the impacts of regulation. From British and Dutch beer, to German lagers, to the American Pilsner, to craft brews. You know, what do you think is the biggest misconception around the topic of this?
Well, one is just like kind of on a personal level. I've had like people email me. It's like, why are you such a snob? Why? People who see that title and think, oh man, this guy's just a craft beer snob, they'd really be surprised by what I drink. Like Utica Club, I like Modelo.
The #1 beer in America today is Modelo, a beer imported from Mexico. It's surpassed the big beers even as beer consumption has waned. But I bet it won't be the last beer on this map, because while the map might stay the same, the beer, that never will. Not in Beermerica. Hey, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. If you haven't been here before, I do videos like these exploring history of business, technology, stuff like that, and how it affects the way we live. And I didn't realize that my sort of burgeoning awakening into the world of craft beer was, just a piece of this much larger historical story that has happened. If you want to see me mapsplain something else, I've done barbecue, now I've done beer. Let me know what you think would be good. I got a lot of suggestions on the last one. This is the first one that I really wanted to do, but I'd love your future suggestions too. I have a newsletter and a Patreon. Both of those support this channel. On the newsletter, I put in an article about something that didn't really fit into the video proper. And this week, I think it's pretty interesting. It's about how the foamy head on those beers became deadly. So go ahead and go to the newsletter to check it out. It's hosted on Patreon, but it's free to sign up, free to read that article. There's a link to it. And you can also see a reaction video on Patreon too if you want to support the channel that way. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being here. And I toast to you. Let me know your favorite beer in the comments. Do we have some sours, hipsters in there? Do we have people who only, want chocolate peanut butter stouts? Or am I an old man for liking IPAs? Is that the new stereotype? I want to know what your perspective is on this. Maybe there's a great NA beer that I should feature as well. So yeah, let me know, and I'll see you next one. All right, bye.